Little boy, why did you have to chase me so hard? Didn't your mother show you what to do? Didn't your father tell you not to push? Little boy, we could have been great friends, but you frightened me to death, you see, and made a rabbit out of me, and now we can't go back to being anything. Perhaps I ought to thank you, for you took my innocence away and made me cruel. How did you know I'd need that later on? You taught me to hide, and you taught me to lie, and to tremble at the telephone, to scream, but never cry. Surely you were wise beyond your years, for you planted in me unknown fears, that since I've met time and again, I wish I could have known it then. I might have been grateful for the experience, rather than for the darkness, so useful to the hunted deer who doesn't know the way. But really I would not have known into how many arms a girl will let herself be thrown, just to escape the one who wants her most. Better to dance with 10 who won't remember her name than to be asked by the one who can't forget it. Little boy, you made me feel guilt that day which never fully went away. You told the world you hated me, and that's when I began to see how much it must have hurt to have dressed up in your first clean shirt and hope like hell she'd understand the things you felt and take your hand. But damn you, little boy, I never had a chance. You couldn't see I wasn't ready for what you monsters call romance. Little boy, you never looked at me the same, as though you didn't know my name, and in the end you made me hate myself for hurting you, but no one ever stopped to tell me what I ought to do. Little boy, maybe someday you'll walk my way and listen to the song I play, and if you're still fond of passing notes, perhaps we'll shed our children's coats and talk an hour or two of what's become of us and why, that finally we might be able to say hello, forgive, and say goodbye. Awareness is the enemy of sanity, for once you hear the screaming, it never stops. Perfume was first created to mask the stench of foul and offensive odors. Spices and bold flavorings were created to mask the taste of putrid and rotting meat. What, then, was music created for? Was it to drown out the voices of others, or the voices within ourselves? I think I know. I remember, when I was still a child, how I was plagued by voices in my head. The voices frightened me, bringing me to tears nearly every night until adolescence, and as such, I was always dehydrated. I lived each day dreading the night to come, when my limbs would be seized by a heavy paralysis, the voices growing louder and louder and louder until I couldn't hear you if you were shouting in my ear. Oddly enough, no one believed these voices of mine to be real enough to warrant looking into, and so I had no choice but to find some way to overcome this nightly terror on my own. After the first few years, the voices began to manifest even during the day. I remember standing in the doorway to my bedroom one afternoon and beginning to cry. I must have made a noise of some sort because my grandmother, who was in the kitchen at the other end of our long hallway, this was the only time I ever saw her, asked me if I was all right. Having already learned to hide my feelings, if only to preserve my 6-year-old dignity, I called back to my grandmother in my calmest voice, telling her that I was fine and that I had only bitten my lip. Naturally, she believed me. As long as I live, I will never forget the night when I lay in my bed, and screaming for help, sobbing, and covering my ears had failed to produce any result. I tried the only thing left. I played music in my head. I played the most beautiful piece of music my 8-year-old mind could comprehend, Pachelbel's Canon in D. Of course, to most people, this work has become as trite and empty as The Bride Wearing White, having been played at weddings ad nauseum. But to me, it was the sound of heaven. All planets aligned, all spheres throughout the entire universe moving together in perfect accord. And even though anything so utterly perfect always made me cry, it didn't matter. Canon in D was the sound of making sense, and it may have saved my life. In the battle between musical order and terrifying chaos, musical order won out every time. Each night this war was waged, and while the voices didn't stop calling to me, I had my secret weapon, and I applied it swiftly, letting the glorious endless repetition of Canon in D unfold like a blanket that covered the voices and smothered them into silence. The battlefield of my sleep was thus occupied until I first began to bleed, and by then the voices were the least of my problems. Of the few friends I have ever divulged this story to, most have suggested that the voices may have been angry spirits haunting me, or remnants of a past life, and that their eventual disappearance meant that they had moved on and were at last at peace. The myriad of shrinks I have emptied my pocketbook to have had no answer for me at all. But I will always believe that the voices fled my mind in terrified anticipation of what was to come. Salon Quality Hair Care System, proven to invigorate hair, as well as Aveda Rosemary Mint Shampoo and Conditioner. This shampoo is infused with 100% natural rosemary and mint, which are known for their invigorating properties. It gently cleanses and increases manageability for hair that's soft and shiny. To add some luster to your daily routine, apply, lather, rinse. For best results, use the Suave Professionals Rosemary and Mint Conditioner. Voila! In view, a humble vaudevillian veteran cast vicariously as both victim and villain by the vicissitudes of fate. This visage, no mere veneer of vanity, is a vestige of the vox populi, now vacant, vanished. However, this valorous visitation of a bygone vexation stands vivified, and has vowed to vanquish these venal and virulent vermin, vanguarding vice and vouchsafing the violently vicious and voracious violation of volition. The only verdict is vengeance, a vendetta, held as a votive, not in vain, for the value and veracity of such shall one day vindicate the vigilant and the virtuous. Verily, this vichyssoise of verbiage veers most verbose, so let me simply add that it is my very good honor to meet you, and you may call me V. Ich tue das nur, weil ein Mädchen mag meine Stimme. There were two warring tribes in the Andes, one that lived in the lowlands and the other high in the mountains. The mountain people invaded the lowlanders one day, and as part of their plundering of the people, they kidnapped a baby of one of the lowlander families and took the infant with them back up into the mountains. The lowlanders didn't know how to climb the mountain. They didn't know any of the trails that the mountain people used, and they didn't know where to find the mountain people or how to track them in the steep terrain. Even so, they sent out their best party of fighting men to climb the mountain and bring the baby home. The men tried first one method of climbing and then another. They tried one trail and then another. After several days of effort, however, they had climbed only several hundred feet. Feeling hopeless and helpless, the lowlander men decided that the cause was lost and that they prepared to return to their village below. As they were packing their gear for the descent, they saw the baby's mother walking toward them. They realized that she was coming down the mountain that they hadn't figured out how to climb, and then they saw that she had the baby strapped to her back. How could that be? One man greeted her and said, "We couldn't climb this mountain. How did you do this when we, the strongest and most able men in the village, couldn't do it?" She shrugged her shoulders and said, "It wasn't your baby." The rains in Spain stay mainly in the plains. The last film I watched was Deliver Us from Evil. It is about a New York police officer named Ralph Sarchie who is struggling with his own personal issues, and he begins investigating a series of disturbing and inexplicable crimes, which are being committed by possessed people. He joins forces with a Catholic priest who is schooled in the rituals of exorcism to combat the frightening and demonic possessions that are terrorizing their city. It's based on the book by the real-life Ralph Sarchie, which details his bone-chilling real-life cases that inspired the cases in the film. This is my ringtone. And this is my text alert.
Look, I don't like to say I told you so, but I told you so.